She was dying. Not the kind of death that comes quick, clean, and merciful. No, this was the slow kind. The kind that strips you down piece by piece until there's nothing left but breath and bone and the crushing weight of knowing you were never enough. Neria stumbled through the rain, her lungs burning, her vision blurred with blood and water. Every step sent fire shooting up her legs. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because behind her, they were coming. The pack she'd once called family. The wolves who'd looked her in the eye and called her sister. They were hunting her now. Not because she'd betrayed them. Not because she'd fought back. But because she was born wrong. Because something in her blood made them afraid. Because her existence was a question they couldn't answer, and so they decided to erase it. The forest was alive with sound. Rain hammering the earth, thunder rolling like war drums, branches snapping under the weight of the storm. But beneath it all, she could hear them. Voices. Snarls. The wet thud of paws against mud. They were close. Too close. Neria's foot caught on a root, and she went down hard. Pain exploded through her ribs where Garrick had kicked her right before he dragged her into the clearing and let the others take their turn. Her palms slammed into the mud, her knees scraped raw against stone. She bit down on a scream and forced herself up, heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst. Run. Just run. But her body was betraying her. Her legs shook. Her vision swam. The cold was seeping into her bones, numbing her fingers, turning her breath to fog. She was running out of time. And then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the crash of boots. Not the growl of wolves closing in. Crying. Thin. Desperate. Helpless. Neria froze, her chest heaving. The sound came again. A wail so fragile it cut through the storm like a knife through skin. It was the sound of something dying. Something too small to fight back. Her instincts screamed at her to keep moving. To survive. To let someone else be the hero. But her feet wouldn't move. Because buried beneath the fear and exhaustion and years of being told she was nothing, there was something else. Something they hadn't been able to beat out of her. A heart that still gave a damn. She turned toward the sound, her pulse roaring in her ears. Through the rain and darkness, she could barely make out the shape ahead, something lying motionless in the mud, half buried beneath a fallen tree. And beside it, two tiny forms writhing in the cold, their cries tearing through the night. Babies. Neria's breath stopped. Her body moved on instinct, stumbling forward through the mud until she was close enough to see the truth. A man. Face down in the dirt. His clothes shredded. His back a canvas of bruises and blood. One arm twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn. He wasn't moving. Wasn't breathing, or if he was, it was so faint she couldn't tell. And beside him, two newborns. Naked except for scraps of torn fabric. Skin pale. Lips blue. Wailing with lungs that sounded like they were ripping apart. Neria dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she reached for them. The babies were soaked through, their tiny bodies trembling violently. One of them, a girl, screamed with everything she had left, her fists clenched tight. The other, a boy, was quieter. Weaker. Like he'd already started to give up. No, not tonight. She pulled them both against her chest, wrapping them in the only warmth she had, her own body. They were so small. So impossibly fragile. She could feel their heartbeats against her skin, fluttering like moths trapped in a jar. Her eyes moved to the man. Even in the darkness, she could see the severity of his injuries. Whoever he was, someone had tried to kill him. Had beaten him until there was nothing left but this, a broken body abandoned in the mud with his children screaming beside him. Her throat burned. She didn't know him. Didn't owe him anything. But looking at him now, at the way his fingers were still curled like he'd tried to reach for his babies before he collapsed, something inside her cracked wide open. He'd tried to protect them. Even when he was dying, he'd tried. Neria pressed two fingers to his neck, her own pulse hammering. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just cold skin and rain and the distant sound of voices getting closer. But then there. Faint. Almost imperceptible. A heartbeat. He was alive. Barely. But alive. Neria's jaw clenched. She knew what this meant. Saving him would slow her down. Make her an easier target. Put her in even more danger than she was already in. But leaving him here? Leaving these babies to die in the mud? That wasn't survival. That was becoming the thing she hated most. She grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled. He was heavy, all muscle and dead weight, but fear gave her strength. She dragged him into a shallow hollow beneath an overhang of rock, tucking his body into the shadows. The babies were still crying, their wails cutting through her like broken glass. She wrapped them tighter, pressing them against her chest, whispering words she wasn't sure they could hear. "I've got you. I've got you." She looked down at the man's face, strong features beneath the blood and bruises. High cheekbones. A jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. He looked like someone who'd once been powerful. Someone who'd commanded fear and respect. But now he looked like nothing. Like someone the world had already erased. Neria's chest tightened. She didn't know why she cared. Didn't know why it mattered. But something in her, something deep and primal and unbreakable, refused to let him go. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you did. But I'm not letting you die. Not tonight." The babies whimpered, their cries fading into exhausted hiccups. Neria pressed a kiss to each of their heads, her heart shattering and rebuilding all at once. She didn't know what came next. Didn't know how she'd survive this. How any of them would. But she knew one thing. This moment, this choice, had just set fire to the rest of her life. And there was no going back. If this story has already grabbed hold of you, if Neria's choice has lit something inside your chest, then don't let go. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart stories. Because here, we don't just tell tales. We burn them into your soul. 3 days. That's how long Neria had been hiding in the cave with a dying man and 2 newborns who refused to stop crying. 3 days of rationing what little food she'd managed to scavenge from the forest. 3 days of boiling water over a fire she had to keep small enough that the smoke wouldn't give them away. 3 days of cleaning wounds that should have killed him, of watching his chest rise and fall in shallow, uneven breaths, wondering if the next one would be his last. 3 days of waiting for him to die. But he didn't. The babies had quieted on the 2nd day, once she'd figured out how to make a thin broth from wild roots and rainwater. They were still weak, too weak. But they were alive. And that was more than she'd hoped for when she'd found them screaming in the mud. The man, though, he was something else entirely. She'd cleaned the blood from his face that first night, her hands trembling as she worked by firelight. And what she'd found beneath the grime and bruises had stopped her cold. He was beautiful. Not in the soft, gentle way. No, his beauty was sharp. Dangerous. The kind that made you forget to breathe. High cheekbones. A jaw that could have been carved from granite. Dark hair that fell across his forehead in waves, even matted with blood and dirt. And scars, so many scars, etched into his skin like a map of every battle he'd ever fought. This wasn't some rogue who'd gotten unlucky. This was a warrior. Neria had seen enough fighters in her life to recognize one. The way his muscles were built, thick and corded, even beneath the damage. The calluses on his hands. The way his body was positioned, even unconscious, like he was ready to spring into action at any moment. Whoever he was, he'd been trained to kill. And someone had tried very hard to make sure he never got the chance again. She sat beside him now, in the dim light of early morning, watching the rise and fall of his chest. His breathing had evened out over the past day, the rattle in his lungs fading. The wounds on his back had stopped bleeding, though they'd left behind angry red lines that would scar. He was healing. Faster than he should have been. Neria frowned, her fingers brushing over the edge of a gash on his shoulder. It had been deep enough that she'd seen bone. But now it was already knitting itself back together, the edges of torn flesh pulling tight, new skin forming over the top. That wasn't normal, even for a wolf. She pulled her hand back, her heart thudding unevenly. What kind of wolf healed like this? What kind of wolf survived injuries that should have killed him 3 times over? The babies stirred in their makeshift bed, a nest of moss and her own torn cloak. The girl whimpered, and Neria moved to pick her up, cradling her against her chest. The little one nuzzled into her warmth, her tiny fist curling against Neria's collarbone. "Shh," Neria whispered, rocking gently. I know. She glanced back at the man, her mind spinning. She should leave. Take the babies and run before he woke up. Because when he did wake up, and there would be questions. Questions she couldn't answer. Questions that would lead to truths she'd spent her whole life trying to bury. But every time she thought about leaving, something stopped her. It wasn't just guilt. It wasn't just the fact that she'd already saved his life and walking away now felt like a betrayal. It was something else. Something she couldn't name. A pull. A tug deep in her chest, like a string tied around her ribs, connecting her to him in a way that didn't make sense. She hated it. And she couldn't ignore it. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows across the cave walls. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by the drip of water from the trees. Neria closed her eyes, exhaustion pressing down on her like a weight. She hadn't slept more than an hour at a time since she'd found them. Every sound outside the cave made her jump. Every shift in the wind made her think they'd been found. But no one had come. Not yet. Maybe they thought she was already dead. Maybe they'd given up the hunt. Or maybe they were just waiting. She opened her eyes, her gaze drifting back to the man. His face was turned toward her now, his features relaxed in a way that made him look almost peaceful. Almost human. But there was nothing human about him. She could feel it. Even unconscious, even broken, there was a presence to him. A weight. Like the air around him was heavier, denser, charged with something she couldn't see but could feel humming against her skin. Power. Raw, unfiltered power. Neria's breath hitched. She'd felt this before. Once. A long time ago, when she'd been dragged before the Council of Alphas and forced to kneel while they decided whether or not she deserved to live. The Alpha King had been there. She'd never seen his face, had kept her eyes on the ground the entire time, too terrified to look up. But she'd felt him. Felt the weight of his presence pressing down on her like a storm about to break. This felt the same. Her stomach twisted. No, that was impossible. The Alpha King had vanished months ago. The entire kingdom had been searching for him. There were rumors. Whispers that he'd been killed, that his throne had been stolen, that the kingdom was on the brink of war. But no one knew the truth. And this man, this broken, bleeding stranger she'd pulled from the mud. He couldn't be. A hand closed around her wrist. Neria gasped, her eyes snapping down. His fingers, calloused, strong, impossibly warm, were wrapped around her arm, his grip firm but not painful. Her gaze shot to his face. His eyes were open. And they were gold. Not brown. Not amber. Gold. Pure, molten gold, glowing faintly in the dim light of the cave like embers in a dying fire. Neria's heart stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, holding her in place. His voice, when it came, was rough. Raw. Like gravel scraped over stone. Neria. Her blood turned to ice. He knew her name. He knew her name. She hadn't told him. Hadn't spoken it aloud. Not once. How her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, her pulse racing. How do you know my name? His eyes didn't leave hers. They were intense, burning, even, but there was something else beneath the gold. Something that looked almost like relief. I've been looking for you, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Neria's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Her mind was spinning, her thoughts tripping over themselves. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. You don't know me, she said, her voice shaking. You don't. I do. His grip on her wrist loosened, but he didn't let go. His thumb brushed over the inside of her wrist, just once, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver racing up her arm. "I've known your name since the night you were born," he said quietly. "I just didn't know where you were." Neria's chest tightened. Her throat burned. She wanted to pull away. Wanted to run. But she couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. "Who are you?" she whispered. His eyes flickered, just for a moment. And something passed over his face. Pain. Regret. Something deeper. "Someone who should have protected you a long time ago." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She stared at him, her heart hammering, her mind racing through 1,000 possibilities and coming up empty. "That's not an answer," she said, her voice barely audible. He exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "My name is Draven," he said. "And I'm the one they've been hunting." Neria's blood ran cold. Draven. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Because Draven wasn't just any wolf. He was the Alpha King. The one the entire kingdom thought was dead. And she'd just saved his life. Neria pulled her wrist free and scrambled backward, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The Alpha King. The Alpha King was lying in her cave, bleeding all over her makeshift bed, staring at her with eyes that burned like liquid fire. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "No. You're supposed to be dead." Everyone said. Everyone was wrong. Draven pushed himself up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. His jaw clenched, but he didn't make a sound. Just forced himself into a sitting position, his back against the cave wall, his chest rising and falling with the effort. Neria's heart was racing so fast she thought it might break through her ribs. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the cold stone floor, trying to ground herself. Trying to think. The Alpha King. The most powerful wolf in the entire kingdom. The one who could command armies with a single word. The one whose bloodline stretched back to the first wolves, the ancient ones who'd walked with gods. And she dragged him through the mud like a common rogue. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why were you out there? Why were you ambushed?" His voice was flat. Cold. But beneath it, there was something darker. Something that tasted like betrayal. By wolves I trusted. Wolves I called brothers. Neria's stomach twisted. She'd heard the rumors, whispers that the Alpha King's own council had turned on him. That someone close to him had sold him out. But she'd never believed it. Never thought it could be true. Because who would dare? Who would be insane enough to try and kill the Alpha King? Draven's gaze shifted to the two babies still sleeping in their nest of moss and fabric. His expression softened, just for a moment, and something raw flickered across his face. "They took everything," he said quietly. "My throne. My pack. My mate." Neria's breath hitched. "Your mate. Dead." The word was a blade. Sharp. Final. "They killed her the night they came for me. Made me watch while his jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. Then they beat me until I couldn't stand. Left me in the forest with my children, expecting the cold to finish what they started." The cave went silent except for the soft crackle of the fire. Neria stared at him, her chest aching. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know if there were words for something like that. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Draven's eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment, she saw the full weight of his grief. It was a living thing, dark and heavy and suffocating. But then he blinked and it was gone. Buried beneath layers of control and steel. "You saved them," he said, his voice softer now. "You saved all of us." Neria shook her head, her throat tight. I didn't know who you were. I couldn't leave them." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her mind scrambling for an answer. Why had she saved them? Why had she risked everything for strangers? "Because you know what it's like to be left behind." The thought came unbidden, sharp and true, and it hit her like a fist to the gut. She looked away, her hands curling into fists against her thighs. Because no one deserves to die like that, she said quietly. Alone. In the mud. With no one to care. Draven was silent for a long moment. When she finally looked back at him, his eyes were fixed on her, intent, searching, like he was trying to see past her words and into the truth beneath. You're not like the others, he said. Neria's pulse spiked. What do you mean? I can feel it. His gaze didn't waver. There's something in you. Something different. Her blood turned to ice. No, not this. Not now. She stood abruptly, her legs shaking, and turned away from him. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. He couldn't know. No one could know. I'm nothing, she said, her voice brittle. Just a rogue. Just someone your pack threw away. That's not true. It is. She spun back to face him, her eyes burning. I'm nothing. I've always been nothing. That's why they... She stopped herself, her jaw clenching so hard her teeth ached. Draven's expression shifted. Something sharp flickered in his eyes, understanding, maybe. Or recognition. What did they do to you? He asked quietly. Neria's breath hitched. Her hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to run. Wanted to disappear. But her feet wouldn't move. They called me cursed, she whispered. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and toxic. Draven didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Why? Neria closed her eyes, her chest tight. She hadn't spoken about this in years. Hadn't let herself think about it. But now, with him staring at her like he could see straight through her walls, the memories came flooding back. She was 7 years old the first time it happened. They'd been playing in the woods, her and the other pups. Chasing each other through the trees, their laughter echoing through the forest. It had been a good day. A rare one. She'd almost felt normal. And then one of the boys had pushed her too hard. She'd fallen into the creek, her head cracking against a rock. Pain had exploded through her skull, and she'd screamed, except it wasn't a scream. It was something else. A sound that didn't belong to any wolf she'd ever heard. A sound that made the trees tremble and the water ripple and the other pups scatter in terror. When she'd climbed out of the creek, soaking wet and dizzy, the adults had been waiting. They'd stared at her like she was a monster. And maybe she was. Because when she looked down at her hands, they weren't hands anymore. They were claws. Silver claws. Not the dark, natural claws of a wolf. Not the claws that every pup grew when they started to shift. Silver. Like moonlight made solid. She'd stared at them, her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps. And then one of the elders had grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to the center of the pack, forcing her to her knees in front of everyone. Cursed, they'd said. Marked by something unnatural. Dangerous. They'd kept her locked away after that. Hidden from the other packs. Told everyone she was sick. Weak. Useless. But the truth was worse. They were afraid of her. Afraid of what she might become. Neria opened her eyes, her vision blurred with unshed tears. I'm not like the other wolves, she said, her voice shaking. I never have been. There's something wrong with me. Something broken. Show me. Her head snapped up. Draven was watching her, his expression unreadable. What? Show me, he said again. Whatever it is they're afraid of. Show me. Neria's heart hammered against her ribs. I can't. Yes, you can. You don't understand. Then help me understand. His voice was firm but not cruel. Not demanding. Just steady. Like he was offering her a choice instead of an order. Neria's hands trembled. She looked down at them, her breath uneven. She hadn't shifted in years. Hadn't let herself. The pack had beaten it out of her. The instinct, the desire, the need. They'd made her afraid of her own skin. But now, standing here in this cave with the Alpha King staring at her like she was something more than broken. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. She closed her eyes and reached inward, toward the part of herself she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. And slowly, carefully, she let it rise. Her fingers began to glow. Faint at first. Just a shimmer of silver light beneath her skin. But then it grew brighter, spreading up her arms, wrapping around her wrists like living flame. Neria gasped, her eyes snapping open. The light pulsed with her heartbeat, casting shadows across the cave walls. It didn't burn, didn't hurt. It just was. Beautiful. Terrifying. Wrong. She looked up at Draven, her chest tight, waiting for the fear. The disgust. The rejection. But he wasn't afraid. He was staring at her like he'd just found something he'd been searching for his entire life. "You're not cursed," he said quietly. Neria's breath caught. "You're the opposite." His eyes met hers, burning with something fierce and undeniable. "You're the one the prophecy spoke of. The one with the silver flame." Neria's world tilted. The prophecy. No. She shook her head, the light flickering and dying as panic clawed its way up her throat. I'm not. You are." Draven pushed himself to his feet, moving toward her with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "And if they find out," he said softly, "they'll kill you for it." Neria couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating, wrapping around her throat like a noose. The prophecy. She'd heard it before. Everyone had. It was the kind of story elders told around fires to scare pups into obedience. A warning. A myth. But standing here now, with silver light still tingling beneath her skin and Draven staring at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life, it didn't feel like a myth anymore. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What prophecy? What are you talking about?" Draven's jaw tightened. He turned away from her, moving toward the mouth of the cave where pale morning light was beginning to filter through the trees. His silhouette was stark against the brightness, broad shoulders, tall frame, every line of his body carved with tension. "There's a place," he said quietly. "Not far from here. Sacred ground. The elders used to take the young alphas there before their coronation, to show them what they were inheriting, what they were meant to protect." Neria's pulse quickened. "What kind of place?" "The shrine of the first wolves." His voice was low, reverent. "Where the ancient ones made their pact with the moon. Where the original bloodlines were forged." A chill ran down Neria's spine. She'd heard stories about the shrine, whispers of a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the spirits of the first wolves still walked, where the moon herself had touched the earth and left her mark. But those were just stories. Weren't they? Draven turned back to her, his golden eyes catching the firelight. "If what I think is true, if you really are what the prophecy spoke of, then the shrine will recognize you. And if it doesn't?" His expression darkened. "Then we'll know I was wrong." But he didn't sound like he thought he was wrong. Neria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire still crackling behind her. Everything was happening too fast. Too much. Just days ago, she'd been running for her life, beaten and broken, with nothing left to lose. And now the Alpha King was telling her she was part of some ancient prophecy? It was insane. It had to be insane. "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "I can't be whatever you think I am. I'm nobody. I'm just. You saved my life." Draven's voice cut through her spiral, firm and unwavering. "You saved my children. You did that when every instinct should have told you to run. To save yourself. That doesn't mean. It means everything." He took a step closer, his presence filling the space between them. "The prophecy speaks of a wolf marked by silver flame. A wolf born outside the traditional bloodlines. A wolf rejected by her own pack because they feared what she could become." Neria's breath caught. Each word hit like a stone thrown at glass, cracking something she'd been holding together for years. "It says she'll rise when the kingdom falls into darkness," Draven continued, his voice dropping lower. "When the throne is stolen and the true king is cast down. When innocent blood is spilled and the old ways are forgotten." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "It says she'll be the one to restore balance. To burn away the corruption. to stand beside the fallen king and help him reclaim what was taken. Neria's legs felt weak. She wanted to laugh, to scream, to tell him he was wrong, that he'd made a mistake, that she was the last person in the world who could be anyone's savior. But the words wouldn't come, because somewhere deep inside her, in a place she'd tried so hard to bury, something was stirring. Something that felt like recognition. Like truth. The shrine, she heard herself say. How far? Draven's expression shifted, something that might have been hope flickering across his face. Half a day's walk. Maybe less if we're careful. Neria glanced back at the babies, still sleeping peacefully in their nest. What about them? We'll bring them. His voice softened. I'm not leaving them again. There was something in the way he said it, something raw and broken, that made Neria's chest ache. She nodded slowly, her mind still spinning. Okay, we'll go to the shrine. But Draven, she met his eyes, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. If this prophecy is wrong, if I'm not whoever you think I am, what then? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching hers. Then I'll still protect you, he said simply. Because you saved my children. And that's a debt I can never repay. They left at dawn. Draven fashioned a sling from torn fabric, securing both babies against his chest despite Neria's protests. He was still healing, she could see the way he moved carefully, the way his jaw clenched when he thought she wasn't looking, but he refused to let her carry them. I've been weak long enough, he'd said, his voice brooking no argument. So Neria walked beside him in silence, her senses on high alert, scanning the forest for any sign of pursuit. The rain had left everything damp and clean, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. Water dripped from leaves overhead, catching the morning light and turning the forest into something almost magical. Almost. Because beneath the beauty, Neria could feel something else. A pull. It had started the moment they'd set out, faint at first. Just a gentle tug in her chest, like a string pulling her forward. But with every step, it grew stronger. More insistent. Like something was calling her. Do you feel that? She asked quietly. Draven glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Feel what? I don't know. It's like... She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to find the words. Like something's pulling me. Toward something. His eyes flickered with something that looked like satisfaction. The shrine. It's recognizing you. Neria's stomach twisted. That's not possible. We're still miles away. Distance doesn't matter. Not for this. They walked in silence after that, the forest growing denser around them. The trees here were ancient, thick trunks wrapped in moss, branches so high overhead they blocked out most of the sky. It felt older here. Wilder. Like they'd stepped into a place that existed outside of time. The pull in Neria's chest grew stronger with every step, until it was almost painful. Like her heart was trying to beat its way out of her ribs. Her skin prickled with awareness, every nerve ending alive and buzzing. And then she saw it. The trees opened into a clearing, and at its center stood something that made Neria's breath catch in her throat. A stone altar. Not carved, grown. Like the rock itself had been shaped by something other than human hands. It rose from the earth in smooth, organic curves, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the filtered sunlight. And around it, Neria froze. Around it, the air was different. It shimmered, rippled, like she was looking at the world through water. And within that shimmer, she could see shapes, figures, translucent and ethereal, moving through the clearing like ghosts. Wolves. Massive wolves, larger than any she'd ever seen, their bodies made of moonlight and shadow. They walked with an ancient grace, their eyes glowing silver as they circled the altar in a slow, eternal dance. The first wolves, Draven breathed beside her, his voice filled with awe. I've only seen them once before. On the night of my coronation. Neria couldn't speak. Couldn't move. The pull in her chest had become a roar, so loud she could barely hear her own thoughts. The wolves turned as one, their silver eyes fixing on her. And then they bowed. Every single one of them lowered their massive heads, their bodies folding into postures of submission, of reverence. Neria's legs gave out. She hit her knees hard, the impact sending pain shooting up her thighs, but she barely felt it. Her entire body was trembling, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't." One of the wolves stepped forward. It was larger than the others, its coat shimmering like starlight. It moved with fluid grace, stopping just in front of her. And then it spoke. Not with words, not with sound, but directly into her mind. "Child of silver flame, daughter of the ancient line, you have been called." Neria's vision blurred. Tears streamed down her face, hot and fast, and she didn't know if they were from fear or wonder or something else entirely. "You were hidden, protected, kept from those who would use your power for darkness." The wolf's eyes bore into hers, ancient and knowing. "But the time for hiding has ended. The kingdom bleeds. The throne is stolen. And you're the key to setting it right." "I don't know how," Neria choked out. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "You will learn. The flame within you knows the way. Trust it. Trust yourself." The wolf stepped closer, and Neria felt something warm press against her forehead. Light exploded behind her eyes, blinding, overwhelming, and suddenly she was somewhere else. She was standing in a throne room. A grand hall with vaulted ceilings and walls carved from black stone. And on the throne sat a man she didn't recognize, cruel eyes, twisted smile, power radiating from him like rot. But beside him, Neria's stomach turned. Beside him stood wolves she did recognize. Council members. Alphas. Wolves who'd sworn oaths of loyalty to Draven. Traitors. All of them. The vision shifted. She saw battlefields. Saw packs turning on each other. Saw innocent wolves, pups, elders, the weak, being slaughtered in the name of the new king's power. She saw darkness spreading across the land like a plague. And then she saw herself, standing in front of the altar, her body wreathed in silver flame, her eyes glowing with ancient power. Her voice, calling forth something that made the earth tremble and the sky crack open. The vision faded and Neria gasped, her body jerking forward. Strong hands caught her, Draven, kneeling beside her, his face tight with concern. Neria, look at me." She blinked, her vision slowly clearing. The spirit wolves were still there, watching. Waiting. "What did you see?" Draven asked urgently. Neria's voice was hoarse. "War. Betrayal. A false king on your throne." His jaw clenched. "Who?" "I don't know. I didn't see his face clearly." But she swallowed hard. "Your council. Some of them are working with him." Draven's eyes blazed with fury, but he kept his voice controlled. "Did you see anything else?" Neria looked down at her hands. They were glowing again, brighter this time, the silver light pulsing with her heartbeat. "I saw what I'm supposed to become," she whispered. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "And it terrifies me." Draven's expression softened. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Good," he said quietly. "Power without fear is dangerous." But Neria, his thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You don't have to face this alone." The spirit wolf's voice echoed in her mind one last time. "The fallen king and the silver flame. Together, you will restore what was broken. Or together, you will watch the world burn." The figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into mist and moonlight. And Neria knew deep in her bones, in a place beyond doubt, that everything had just changed. There was no going back now. Only forward. Into fire. They made it back to the cave just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Neria's legs were trembling with exhaustion, her mind still reeling from everything she'd seen at the shrine. The spirit wolves. The visions. The prophecy that had stopped being myth and become terrifyingly, undeniably real. She'd spent the entire walk back in silence, trying to process it all. Trying to figure out what it meant. What she was supposed to do with this knowledge that felt too big, too heavy, too impossible to carry. Draven hadn't pushed her to talk. He'd simply walked beside her, the babies secure against his chest, his presence steady and grounding. Every so often, she'd catch him glancing at her, watching, assessing, like he was trying to read something written beneath her skin. But he didn't ask questions. And she was grateful for that. Because she didn't have answers. Not yet. They'd just reached the entrance to the cave when Draven stopped abruptly, his entire body going rigid. Neria froze. What? He held up a hand, silencing her. His head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the forest around them. And then Neria smelled it. Smoke. Not the clean smell of a campfire. Something darker. Thicker. Like burning flesh and charred wood and something else she couldn't name, but made her stomach turn. Someone's been here, Draven said quietly, his voice cold and controlled in a way that made her skin prickle. Neria's heart hammered against her ribs. The pack? I don't know. He shifted the babies carefully, his jaw tight. Stay behind me. They moved forward slowly, every sense on high alert. The smell grew stronger as they approached, and Neria's wolf instinct screamed at her to run. To take the babies and disappear into the forest before whatever was waiting inside found them. But she didn't run. She stayed beside Draven, her hands curling into fists, silver light beginning to shimmer faintly beneath her skin. The cave entrance loomed ahead, dark and silent. Too silent. Draven stepped inside first, his movements cautious. Neria followed, her breath shallow, her pulse roaring in her ears. The fire she'd left burning was out. Smothered. The blankets she'd used for the babies were torn to shreds, scattered across the cave floor like someone had been searching for something. And on the wall. Neria's breath caught. On the wall, carved deep into the stone in jagged, violent strokes, was a message. We know what she is. We're coming. Draven's entire body went still. The air around him seemed to shift, growing heavier, colder. Neria could feel the rage rolling off him in waves, controlled, lethal, barely contained. They found us, she whispered, her voice shaking. Not us. Draven turned to her, his golden eyes blazing. You. They found you. Neria's stomach dropped. How? I've been so careful. I haven't shifted. Haven't used my power. The shrine. Draven's voice was tight. The moment you awakened, the moment the first wolves recognized you, it sent out a ripple. Anyone with enough power would have felt it. So they know. Neria's hands trembled at her sides. They know what I am. What I can do. They know you're a threat. Draven moved closer, his expression fierce. And they'll do everything in their power to eliminate you before you become one. The babies began to fuss, their tiny cries filling the cave. Draven immediately shifted his attention to them, his large hands moving with surprising gentleness as he checked them over, soothing them with quiet murmurs. Neria stared at the message carved into the wall, her mind racing. This was it. This was the moment she'd been dreading her entire life. The moment when hiding stopped being an option. When running stopped being enough. We need to leave, she said quietly. Now. Before they. The sound of footsteps echoed from outside the cave. Multiple sets. Heavy boots crunching over dead leaves and broken branches. Neria's blood turned to ice. Draven handed her the babies without a word, his movements swift and efficient. She took them, cradling them against her chest, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Stay back, Draven said, his voice low and dangerous. No matter what happens, you protect them. Understand? Draven. Do you understand? Neria swallowed hard and nodded. Draven turned toward the cave entrance, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. The air around him began to shimmer, heat radiating from his skin as his power rose to the surface. And then they appeared. 5 wolves stepped into the cave entrance, their forms silhouetted against the dying light outside. They were massive alphas, every single one of them. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the faint embers of the dead fire. The one in the center stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down the left side of his face. Neria recognized him immediately. Garrick. The same wolf who'd kicked her. Who'd thrown her out into the storm. Who'd called her cursed and worthless and told her she deserved to die. He smiled when he saw her, and it was the cruelest thing she'd ever seen. Well, well, Garrick said, his voice dripping with mockery. Look what we found. The little cursed runt. Still alive. How disappointing. Neria's hands tightened around the baby's, fury rising hot and sharp in her chest. You should have stayed dead, Garrick continued, his eyes sliding to Draven. Both of you. Draven didn't move. Didn't speak. He just stood there, radiating power and barely controlled violence. You know who I am, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Garrick's smile widened. Oh, we know. The great Alpha King. Fallen. Broken. Hiding in a cave like a wounded dog. One of the other wolves laughed. A harsh, grating sound that made Neria's skin crawl. Your throne doesn't belong to you anymore, Garrick said. Neither does this kingdom. And neither does she. His eyes locked on Neria, and the hatred in them was so visceral it felt like a physical blow. The girl is an abomination, Garrick spat. A mistake that should have been culled the moment she was born. But don't worry, he took a step forward. We're here to fix that. Draven moved. One moment he was standing still. The next, he was a blur of motion faster than Neria's eyes could track. He slammed into Garrick with the force of a battering ram, sending the larger wolf crashing backward into the cave wall. The other 4 wolves lunged. Chaos erupted. Snarls and roars filled the cave, echoing off the stone walls. Bodies collided with bone-crushing force. Blood splattered across the ground. Neria pressed herself against the back wall, clutching the babies to her chest, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. Draven fought like something feral, like death given form. His movements were precise, brutal, efficient. Every strike was calculated to incapacitate, to destroy. But he was still healing, still weak from the injuries that should have killed him. And there were 5 of them. One of the wolves broke away from the fight, his eyes locking on Neria. He grinned, his teeth stained with blood, and started toward her. No! Draven roared, trying to intercept, but 2 other wolves grabbed him, dragging him back. The wolf advancing on Neria was massive, his shoulders nearly brushing the cave's ceiling. His claws scraped against the stone floor, leaving deep gouges. Come here, little cursed one, he growled. Let's see what you're really made of. Neria's entire body was shaking. The babies were crying, their wails high and desperate. She had nowhere to go, nowhere to run. The wolf lunged, and something inside Neria snapped. Silver light exploded from her body, blinding, searing, pure. It filled the cave like a supernova, driving back the darkness, illuminating every crack and crevice. The wolf who'd been lunging at her was thrown backward, his body slamming into the cave wall with enough force to crack stone. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious or dead, Neria couldn't tell. Didn't care. The light poured from her hands, her arms, her chest. It wrapped around her like living armor, pulsing with her heartbeat. And within that light, she felt something awakening. Something ancient. Something powerful. Something that had been sleeping inside her for her entire life, waiting for this exact moment. The other wolves froze, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Even Draven had stopped fighting, staring at her with an expression that looked like awe. Neria's voice, when it came, didn't sound like her own. It was deeper, stronger, layered with something that made the air itself vibrate. Get out. The words echoed through the cave, through the forest, through the earth itself. Get out, or I will burn you from existence. Garrick scrambled to his feet, his face pale, his hands raised. You don't know what you're doing. You can't control that power. It'll consume you. Get out. The silver flame roared higher, licking at the cave's ceiling, scorching the stone. The wolves nearest to her stumbled backward, terror written across their faces. Garrick locked eyes with her one last time. And in that moment, Neria saw it, the fear. The realization that she wasn't the weak, broken girl they'd cast out anymore. She was something else. Something they should have been afraid of all along. This isn't over, Garrick snarled. The council will hear about this. They'll come for you. And when they do, let them come. Neria's voice was cold. Final. I'll be waiting. Garrick's jaw clenched. Then he turned and ran, the other wolves following close behind, their forms disappearing into the forest. The moment they were gone, the silver flame flickered and died. Neria's legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees, the babies still clutched against her chest. Her entire body was shaking, adrenaline and exhaustion warring inside her. Draven was at her side in an instant, his hands gentle as he helped steady her. You did it, he said quietly, his voice filled with something that sounded like pride. You sent them running. Neria looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. I'm so scared, she whispered. Draven's expression softened. He reached out, his thumb brushing away her tears. I know, he said. But Neria, you just proved something tonight. What? His golden eyes burned into hers. That you're not the one who should be afraid. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. They are. The cave was silent except for the soft crackle of the fire Draven had rebuilt. Neria sat with her back against the stone wall, the babies finally asleep in her arms. They'd cried for what felt like hours after the attack, terrified wails that had torn through her chest like claws. But she'd held them, rocked them. Whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep until their tiny bodies had finally gone limp with exhaustion. Now they slept, their breathing soft and even, their faces peaceful in a way that made her throat tight. She looked down at them, at their impossibly small fingers curled against her chest, at the way their mouths moved slightly in sleep, like they were dreaming of milk and warmth and safety. They trusted her. These two fragile lives trusted her completely, even though she was a stranger. Even though she was cursed. Even though she'd proven tonight that she was exactly what her pack had always said she was. Dangerous. Neria's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the makeshift blanket around them. She could still feel the silver flame beneath her skin, not burning, not raging like it had been, but present. Waiting. Like a beast that had tasted freedom and now knew it could break free whenever it wanted. It terrified her. Not the power itself, but what it meant. What she could become. What she might destroy. Across the cave, Draven was tending to his wounds. He'd stripped off what remained of his torn shirt, revealing a torso that looked like a map of violence. Bruises in various stages of healing painted his ribs in shades of purple and yellow. Deep gashes crossed his shoulders and back, some still angry and red, others already beginning to close with that unnatural speed she'd noticed before. He moved carefully, methodically, cleaning the worst of the cuts with water heated over the fire. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable, but Neria could see the tension in his shoulders. The way his hands paused sometimes, pressing against a wound that must have hurt more than he'd admit. He'd fought for her tonight. Fought when he was still healing. When he should have been resting. When his own survival should have been the only thing that mattered. But he'd stood between her and 5 full-grown alphas without hesitation. You should let me help, Neria said quietly. Draven glanced at her, his golden eyes catching the firelight. You have your hands full. They're asleep. She looked down at the babies, then back at him. And you can barely reach the wounds on your back. He was silent for a moment, his gaze holding hers. Then he nodded slowly. Neria carefully, gently transferred the babies to their moss bed, making sure they were warm and secure before standing. Her legs were still shaky from earlier, from the fight, from the power that had exploded out of her, but she forced herself to move steadily across the cave. Draven handed her the cloth he'd been using without a word. She knelt beside him, dipping the fabric into the warm water, wringing it out. The firelight cast shadows across his back, making the wounds look even worse than they probably were. But some of them were deep. Deep enough that she could see muscle beneath torn skin. This is going to hurt, she warned. I've had worse. Neria pressed the cloth against the first wound, cleaning away dried blood and dirt. Draven's body went rigid, his shoulders tensing, but he didn't make a sound. Didn't flinch. Just sat there, breathing slowly, evenly, like he'd learned long ago how to turn pain into something he could control. She worked in silence, moving from one wound to the next. The intimacy of it, of touching him like this, of seeing him vulnerable, made her chest feel tight. Made her hyper-aware of every breath, every small movement, every place where her fingers brushed against undamaged skin. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "For tonight. For fighting for me. You saved my children." Draven's voice was rough. "You saved my life. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. Even though I'm what they said I am?" The words came out before she could stop them. "Even though I'm dangerous?" Draven turned his head slightly, looking at her over his shoulder. The firelight made his eyes glow, turned them into molten gold. "You're not dangerous," he said. "You're powerful. There's a difference." Neria's breath caught. "Is there?" "Yes." He turned more fully, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wounds. "Dangerous is what Garrick and his pack are. What the false king on my throne is. They use power to destroy. To control. To take what doesn't belong to them." He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested against his shoulder. "You used your power to protect," he said quietly. "To save 2 babies you'd never met. To defend someone you barely know. That's not dangerous, Neria. That's rare." Her throat burned. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that maybe the pack had been wrong about her all along. But the fear was still there. The memory of their faces when they'd seen what she could do. The disgust. The terror. "What if I can't control it?" she whispered. "What if next time I hurt someone I don't mean to? What if Then I'll be there." Draven's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I'll help you learn. Help you understand what you are. You don't even know what I am. I know enough." His eyes searched hers. The prophecy spoke of a wolf with silver flame. A wolf born outside the traditional bloodlines. A wolf who would rise when the kingdom fell. He paused, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture that felt both comforting and dangerously intimate. "You're not a mistake," he said. "You're not cursed. You're exactly what the world needs right now, even if it doesn't know it yet." Neria's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her the way Draven was looking at her now, like she was something precious instead of something broken. "Why do you care?" The question came out raw, vulnerable. "You're the Alpha King. You have a kingdom to reclaim. A throne to take back. Why waste time on someone like me?" Draven's expression shifted. Something flickered in his eyes. Something dark and haunted and achingly human. "Because I know what it's like," he said quietly. "To be cast out. To have everything you thought was yours stripped away. To be left for dead by people you trusted." He looked away, his jaw clenching. "When they came for me that night, when my own council turned on me, I thought I was going to die. I thought my children would die. And the only thing I could think about was how alone we were. How no one was coming. How we didn't matter anymore." His voice dropped even lower. "And then you found us. A woman who had every reason to keep running. Who could have left us there and saved herself. But you didn't." He turned back to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath stop. "So don't tell me you don't matter," he said. "Don't tell me you're not worth fighting for. Because you proved otherwise the moment you pulled me from that mud." Neria couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The air between them felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Draven's hand moved from hers to her face, his palm cupping her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so powerful. "I see you, Neria," he whispered. "All of you. The power. The fear. The strength you don't even know you have. And I'm not afraid of what you are." His thumb brushed away a tear that had finally escaped despite her best efforts. "I'm in awe of it." The words hit her like a physical force. Her chest felt like it was cracking open, years of walls and defenses crumbling under the weight of his honesty. "Draven, you don't have to say anything. His voice was soft but firm. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that you're not alone anymore. That whatever comes next, whatever battles we have to fight, I'm with you. Not because I owe you, but because I choose to be. Neria's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst. She was acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his hand against her skin, of the way his eyes kept flickering down to her lips before returning to meet her gaze. She should pull away, should put distance between them before this became something she couldn't take back. But she didn't want to. For the first time in her life, she wanted to lean in, to let someone see her, to trust that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this. What if I'm not strong enough, she whispered. What if I let you down? Draven's smile was small, sad, but genuine. Then we'll figure it out together. He leaned closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. The gesture was intimate without being demanding, comforting without being possessive. I've lost everything, he said quietly. My throne, my mate, my pack, everything except my children. And the one thing I know for certain is that strength isn't about never falling. It's about choosing to stand back up. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling gently in her hair. And you, Neria, you've been getting back up your entire life. Her breath shuddered out of her. The space between them had shrunk to almost nothing. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell cedar and smoke, and something distinctly him that made her wolf instincts stir in ways she'd never experienced before. His lips were so close. All she had to do was close the distance. Just lean forward an inch. Maybe two. But something held her back. Fear, maybe. Or the knowledge that once she crossed this line, there would be no going back. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to let someone in. Neither do I. Draven's breath ghosted across her lips. Not anymore. But maybe we can figure it out together. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the forest was quiet, the night peaceful in a way that felt fragile. Temporary. Like the calm before another storm. But in this moment, in this small cave with firelight dancing across stone walls and two sleeping babies and a broken king who looked at her like she was something worth saving, Neria let herself believe that maybe peace was possible. That maybe she wasn't meant to be alone forever. That maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth fighting for. She didn't kiss him. Not yet. But she stayed close, her forehead pressed against his, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart beating strong and steady. Stay with me tonight, she whispered. Just, don't leave. I'm not going anywhere. Draven's voice was a promise. A vow. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And as the fire burned low and the night stretched on around them, Neria finally let herself rest. Let herself trust. Let herself hope that maybe the worst was behind her. She was wrong, of course. The worst was still coming. But for now, for this one stolen moment of peace, she let herself believe in something she'd never had before. A future that didn't end in pain. 3 weeks. That's how long they'd managed to hide. 3 weeks of moving through the forest like ghosts, never staying in one place more than a night. 3 weeks of watching over their shoulders, of keeping the babies quiet, of rationing what little food they could scavenge or hunt. 3 weeks of pretending they were safe. But Neria had known better. She'd felt it growing in her chest like a shadow, the certainty that they were being watched. Tracked. That somewhere out there, eyes were following their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And tonight, that moment had come. They'd taken shelter in an abandoned den at the base of a cliff, a place Draven had said was sacred ground, protected by ancient wards that should have kept them hidden. Should have given them at least one night of real rest. He'd been wrong. Neria stood now at the entrance to the den, her body rigid with tension, staring out at the clearing beyond. The moon was full and heavy in the sky, casting everything in stark silver light. Beautiful. Peaceful. A lie. Because the clearing wasn't empty. It was filled with wolves. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Their eyes glowed in the darkness like scattered embers, surrounding the den in a perfect circle. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, waiting, their presence a suffocating pressure that made the air feel too thick to breathe. And at the center of them all stood a figure Neria recognized immediately. Not Garrick this time. Someone worse. Alpha Theron, leader of the Grand Council. The wolf who'd sat in judgment over her when she was 7 years old. The wolf who'd declared her cursed and ordered her hidden away like a shameful secret. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, imposing, with silver streaking through his dark hair and eyes that held the cold calculation of someone who'd never doubted his own righteousness. He wore the ceremonial robes of the council, deep red fabric embroidered with gold thread that caught the moonlight. He looked like authority, like law, like everything Neria had spent her life being afraid of. Behind her, she heard Draven moving. His footsteps were careful, measured, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. The barely controlled rage. "Stay with the babies," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off Theron. "Neria, please." Her voice cracked slightly. "They need you more than I do right now." Draven was silent for a long moment. Then she felt his hand on her shoulder, warm, steady, grounding. "I'm not letting you face this alone," he said. "You don't have a choice." Neria turned to look at him, and something in her expression must have told him she meant it. "If they take me, you run. You take your children and you run as far and as fast as you can. Promise me." Draven's jaw clenched. His golden eyes burned with something fierce and protective and stubborn. "I'm not promising that." "Draven." "No." His hand tightened on her shoulder. "We stand together. Or we don't stand at all." Before Neria could argue, Theron's voice rang out across the clearing. It was deep, commanding, the kind of voice that expected obedience without question. "Neria of the Ashwood Pack. You are hereby summoned before the Grand Council to answer for your crimes." Neria's blood turned to ice. "Crimes? Step forward. Now. Or we will come in and take you by force." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. The silver flame beneath her skin stirred, responding to her fear, her anger. She could feel it wanting to rise, wanting to burn. But she forced it down. Not yet. Not until she knew what she was facing. She took a breath and stepped out of the den, into the moonlight, into the circle of waiting wolves. Draven moved with her, his presence a solid wall of support at her back. The wolves around them shifted, their eyes tracking every movement. Neria could feel their judgment, their fear, their hatred. She lifted her chin and met Theron's gaze directly. "What crimes?" Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I've done nothing wrong." Theron's expression didn't change. "You harbored a fugitive. You aided the fallen king in evading justice. And most damningly," his eyes narrowed, "you used forbidden magic. Magic that has been outlawed by the council for 3 generations. I was protecting children." Neria's voice rose despite herself. "Babies who would have died if I'd done nothing. You interfered with council business." "Council business?" She took a step forward, anger overriding caution. "Since when is leaving newborns to freeze to death council business?" "Since their father was declared an enemy of the kingdom." Theron's voice was cold. "Final. Since he was convicted of crimes against the throne and sentenced to execution." Neria's stomach dropped. She glanced back at Draven, saw the fury written across his face. "Convicted?" Draven's voice was deadly quiet. "By what trial? What jury?" "By the emergency powers granted to the council in times of crisis." Theron's gaze shifted to Draven, and there was something almost like satisfaction in his eyes. "By unanimous vote of all 12 council members." 12. Draven's laugh was bitter, sharp. "There are 13 council members. I'm one of them. Or did you forget? You forfeited your seat when you abandoned your duties. When you put your personal grief above the needs of the kingdom. I was ambushed." Draven's control was cracking, his voice rising. "Beaten and left for dead by wolves I trusted. Wolves who serve on that same council. A convenient story." Theron folded his hands in front of him. But one we have no evidence to support. What we do have evidence of is your disappearance. Your failure to appear at council sessions. Your abandonment of the throne during the kingdom's greatest time of need. Neria's mind was racing. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. Unless... You knew, she breathed, the pieces clicking into place. You knew he was alive. You knew where he was. And you waited. Theron's gaze slid back to her. Careful, girl. You waited until someone found him. Until someone saved him. So you could use it against them. Her voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with rage. You let him almost die so you could paint him as weak. As abandoned. So you could justify taking his throne. The throne was already taken. Theron's voice was matter-of-fact. Unapologetic. King Valen sits upon it now. Rightfully. Legally. And he will continue to do so. King Valen. The name hit Neria like a physical blow. She'd heard it whispered in the weeks since they'd been running. Heard rumors of a new king. A powerful alpha who'd stepped in to restore order after Draven's disappearance. But she hadn't known who he was. Hadn't realized. Valen is my brother, Draven said, his voice hollow. Empty. My younger brother. Theron smiled. It was a cold, cruel expression. Yes. And he has proven himself far more capable than you ever were. The kingdom prospers under his rule. The packs are unified. Peace has been restored. Peace? Draven's voice rose to a roar. You call this peace? You murdered my mate. You tried to kill my children. We did what was necessary to ensure a clean transition of power. Theron's tone never wavered. Your mate was loyal to you. She would have fought. She would have raised your children to challenge Valen's claim. It was unfortunate, but necessary. Neria had never felt rage like this before. It burned through her veins like poison, like acid, eating away at every shred of control she had left. They'd planned it. All of it. They'd orchestrated Draven's downfall. Murdered his mate in cold blood. Left him to die with his babies crying beside him. And they called it necessary. You're monsters, she whispered. Theron's eyes moved back to her, and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like pity. No, child. We are survivors. We do what must be done to protect the kingdom, even when it requires difficult choices. He took a step forward. Which brings us to you. Neria's entire body tensed. You possess power that hasn't been seen in this kingdom for centuries. Power that was outlawed for good reason. Power that, in the wrong hands, could tear this world apart. I would never. Wouldn't you? Theron's voice cut through her protest. When they're threatening someone you care about. When they're coming for those babies you've been protecting. What wouldn't you do, Neria? What line wouldn't you cross? She couldn't answer. Because he was right. She would burn the world for those babies. She would destroy anyone who tried to hurt them. And that truth terrified her more than anything else. The prophecy speaks of a silver flame that will either save the kingdom or destroy it, Theron continued. The council believes, unanimously, that you are too great a risk to be allowed to live. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Behind her, Draven moved. She felt him shift, felt his power rising, preparing to fight. No, Theron said sharply. If you attack, Draven, my wolves have orders to kill the girl immediately. And then your children. Is that what you want? Draven froze. Neria could feel his rage, his helplessness. Could feel him being torn apart by impossible choices. There is, however, an alternative. Theron's voice softened slightly. One that allows everyone to walk away from this. What alternative? Neria asked, her voice barely audible. Surrender yourself to the council. Allow us to bind your power. To ensure you can never use it again. Do this, and we will spare Draven and his children. They can live out their days in exile, forgotten but alive. And if I refuse? Theron's expression hardened. Then we kill all of you. Here. Tonight. And we burn this place to ensure no trace of your existence remains. Neria's breath came in short, shallow gasps. Her mind was spinning, searching for a way out, for any option that didn't end in death or surrender. But there was nothing. They were surrounded, outnumbered. And even with her power, even with Draven fighting beside her, she couldn't protect the babies and fight off dozens of trained warriors. Don't. Draven's voice was rough, desperate. Don't do this. There's no other way, she whispered. There's always another way. We'll fight. They'll kill your children, Draven. She turned to look at him, her eyes burning with unshed tears. They'll kill them while you watch. Just like they did with your mate. Is that what you want? His face crumpled. And in that moment, she saw him break. Saw the mighty Alpha King reduced to a father who couldn't protect his own. Neria turned back to Theron, her jaw set. I'll go with you. But you swear on your honor, on your bond to the moon, that you'll let them go. That you won't hunt them. Won't harm them. Ever. Theron studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You have my word. It was a lie. Neria knew it was a lie. But it was the only chance she had. She took a step forward, and Draven's hand closed around her wrist, spinning her back to face him. I can't lose you too, he said, his voice breaking. I can't. Neria reached up, her palm cupping his cheek. The stubble on his jaw scratched against her skin. His eyes, those impossible golden eyes, were wet with tears he was too proud to let fall. You saved me first, she whispered. That night in the clearing. When you looked at me like I was something more than broken. You saved me, Draven. And now it's my turn. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was brief. Desperate. A goodbye kiss that tasted like salt and smoke and everything she'd never get to say. When she pulled away, his eyes were closed, his jaw clenched so tight she thought it might shatter. Take care of them, she said. And don't you dare give up on getting your throne back. Promise me. Neria. Promise me. His eyes opened. Met hers. And in them, she saw a vow being made. I promise. She nodded once. Then pulled away from him and walked toward Theron, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. The circle of wolves parted for her. She didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Because if she did, she'd break. Theron gestured, and two wolves moved forward, heavy iron shackles in their hands. The metal was etched with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight, binding magic, designed to suppress her power. They clamped them around her wrists, and immediately she felt it. Felt the silver flame being smothered, buried, locked away behind walls she couldn't break through. She gasped, her knees buckling. One of the wolves caught her, hauling her upright. Take her to the holding cells, Theron commanded. The council will convene at dawn to decide her fate. As they dragged her away, Neria finally looked back. Draven was standing at the entrance to the den, his children clutched against his chest. His eyes were locked on hers, burning with a mixture of grief and rage and something that looked like a promise. And as the forest swallowed her whole and the moonlight faded behind the trees, Neria held on to that look. Held on to the memory of his lips on hers. Held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Even if it felt exactly like one. The cell was cold. Not just physically cold. Though the stone walls seemed to leach every bit of warmth from the air, leaving her shivering in the thin dress they'd given her after stripping away her blood-stained clothes. It was cold in a way that went deeper. A coldness that seeped into her bones and wrapped around her heart and whispered that this was where she'd die. Alone. Forgotten. Erased. Neria sat with her back against the wall, the iron shackles heavy on her wrists. The runes etched into the metal glowed faintly in the darkness, pulsing with a rhythm that felt wrong. Invasive. Like they were reaching inside her and choking the life out of everything that made her who she was. Her power was still there, she could feel it, buried deep beneath layers of binding magic. But it was distant. Muffled. Like trying to shout through water. Unreachable. She'd been here for hours. Maybe days. It was impossible to tell in the darkness. They'd brought her food once. A bowl of thin broth and stale bread that she'd forced herself to eat even though her stomach had threatened to rebel with every bite. She needed her strength. even if she didn't know what she'd use it for. The door to her cell opened with a grinding shriek of metal on stone. Neria's head snapped up, her body tensing. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by torchlight from the corridor beyond. Not Theron. Someone else. The figure stepped inside, and the door clanged shut behind them, plunging the cell back into near darkness. But Neria's eyes had adjusted enough to make out details. A woman. Tall, willowy, with long silver hair that fell past her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight. Her eyes were pale, almost colorless, and they seemed to glow faintly in the dark. She moved with a grace that was almost otherworldly, her bare feet making no sound against the stone floor. "Who are you?" Neria asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. The woman tilted her head, studying Neria with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time to meet you," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, like wind chimes in a breeze. "Someone who knows what you are. What you could be." Neria's pulse quickened. "If you're here to kill me, just get it over with. Kill you." The woman laughed, a sound that was both beautiful and slightly unnerving. "Child, if I wanted you dead, you would have been dead long before you ever set foot in this place." She moved closer, crouching down until she was eye level with Neria. Up close, her features were striking, high cheekbones, sharp jaw, skin that looked like porcelain. But there was something ancient about her. Something that suggested she was far older than her appearance indicated. "My name is Saris," she said, "and I am what your people would call an oracle. A keeper of the old knowledge. A guardian of prophecies that were spoken long before this kingdom existed." Neria's breath caught. The prophecy. About the silver flame. Among others. Saris's pale eyes searched Neria's face. "But yes, that one most importantly. Then you know." Neria's voice dropped to a whisper. "You know what's going to happen to me. I know what they plan to happen to you." Saris reached out, her fingers hovering just above the shackles on Neria's wrists. "The council will convene at dawn. They will put you on trial. And they will sentence you to death, not quickly, but slowly, ceremonially, as a warning to anyone else who might possess forbidden power." Neria's stomach turned. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the prophecy doesn't end there." Saris's voice dropped lower, more urgent. "Because they're wrong about what you are. What you represent." She pulled back slightly, her expression intense. "The silver flame isn't a curse, Neria. It's a birthright. One that was stolen from your bloodline generations ago by wolves who feared what it could do. What it could change." "What do you mean, stolen?" "Your ancestors were the original guardians of this kingdom. The first wolves, the ones you saw at the shrine, they didn't just create the werewolf packs. They created balance. Light and shadow. Power and restraint. And they gave certain bloodlines the ability to maintain that balance. To ensure that no one wolf, no one pack could ever gain too much power." Saris's eyes glowed brighter. "Your bloodline carried the silver flame. The ability to burn away corruption. To see through lies. To restore what had been broken. But 300 years ago, the council decided that kind of power was too dangerous. Too unpredictable. So they hunted your ancestors down. Killed most of them. Scattered the rest. And made laws ensuring that anyone who showed signs of the flame would be eliminated before they could fully awaken." Neria's mind was reeling. "But I wasn't eliminated. They just hid me away. Because they were afraid." Saris smiled grimly. "Because even as a child, you showed potential that terrified them. And they didn't know if killing you would trigger something worse. So they compromised. They locked you away and hoped you'd never fully awaken. But I did. Because you were meant to." Saris's voice was fierce now. "Because the kingdom is dying, Neria. The false king on the throne, Valen. He's not just corrupt. He's something worse. Something that shouldn't exist." "What do you mean?" Saris was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with something that sounded like dread. "He made a pact. With something old. Something that lives in the spaces between worlds. Something that feeds on chaos and pain and the suffering of innocence." Neria's blood ran cold. What kind of something? A shadow demon. One of the ancient enemies the first wolves fought to seal away. Valen found a way to break the seal, to offer himself as a vessel in exchange for power. And now Cerys's expression darkened. Now he's spreading that corruption throughout the kingdom. Slowly, subtly, turning wolves against each other, poisoning the land, preparing the way for his master to fully cross over into this world. The cell suddenly felt even colder. Neria wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process what she was hearing. If that's true, she said slowly, then why tell me? I'm locked in here. Powerless. What am I supposed to do about it? Cerys reached out again, and this time her fingers closed around the shackles on Neria's wrists. These bindings were made by council magic, she said. But council magic is nothing compared to what runs in your veins. Her eyes met Neria's. The silver flame doesn't obey their laws. It doesn't bend to their will. It answers to only one thing, the truth of who you are. And if you can accept that truth, if you can stop being afraid of your own power. She squeezed the shackles. Then these chains mean nothing. Neria stared at her, her heart hammering. I don't know how. Yes, you do. Cerys's voice was gentle but firm. You've always known. You've just been taught to suppress it, to deny it, to believe you were broken instead of extraordinary. She leaned closer, her pale eyes boring into Neria's. The flame isn't separate from you, Neria. It is you. Your anger. Your pain. Your love. Your desperate need to protect the people you care about. All of it, every emotion, every memory, every scar, that's what feeds the fire. Neria's breath was coming faster now. She could feel it, buried beneath the binding magic, beneath years of fear and shame. A warmth. A presence. Something that had been waiting for her to finally reach for it without flinching. What happens if I let it out? She whispered. Then you become what you were always meant to be. Cerys smiled. And the kingdom will never be the same. She stood, backing toward the door. They're coming for you soon, she said. The council. They'll drag you to the ceremonial grounds and make a spectacle of your death. They'll use you as an example. A warning. The door opened behind her, spilling torchlight into the cell. Unless you decide to be something else entirely. And then she was gone, the door slamming shut, leaving Neria alone in the darkness once more. But something had changed. The coldness that had wrapped around her heart was starting to crack, starting to burn away. Neria closed her eyes and reached inward, past the fear, past the doubt, toward the place where the silver flame lived. And for the first time in her life, she didn't try to push it away. She pulled it closer. They came for her at dawn. 6 guards, all heavily armed, their faces grim and professional. They unlocked her cell and hauled her to her feet, their grips bruising on her arms. Neria didn't resist. She let them drag her through the corridors, up winding staircases, past rows of other cells where prisoners watched with hollow eyes. The fortress was massive. All black stone and iron bars and the smell of despair. But Neria barely noticed. Because inside her, something was waking up. The silver flame had started as a spark. Then a flicker. And now it was growing, spreading through her veins like liquid fire, testing the boundaries of the binding magic, searching for weaknesses. The guards led her outside, into a courtyard flooded with morning light. And Neria's breath caught. Hundreds of wolves filled the space. Maybe thousands. They lined the walls, packed into every available space, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment and fear. At the center of the courtyard stood a platform. And on that platform, a stake. Chains hanging from it, wood piled around its base. They were going to burn her. Neria's legs nearly gave out, but the guards held her upright, dragging her forward through the crowd. Wolves pressed in close, their voices rising in a cacophony of sound. Cursed. Abomination. Burn her. The words hit like stones, each one chipping away at the fragile control she'd been holding onto. But beneath the fear, beneath the shock, something else was rising. Rage. Pure, incandescent rage. They dragged her up onto the platform, chained her wrists to the stake. The iron bit into already raw skin, and Neria bit back a cry of pain. The crowd fell silent as Theron stepped forward, his ceremonial robes billowing in the morning breeze. Behind him stood the other council members, 11 wolves, all of them older, powerful, their expressions carved from stone. And beside Theron, Neria's breath stopped. A man she'd never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, with features that were almost beautiful except for the coldness in his eyes. His hair was dark, his skin pale, and there was something wrong about the way he moved. Something that made her wolf instincts scream danger. This had to be Valen, the false king, Draven's brother. And as he looked at her, his lips curved into a smile that made her blood run cold. Because his eyes weren't gold like Draven's. They were black. Completely black. Like someone had carved holes in his face and filled them with darkness. People of the kingdom, Theron's voice rang out across the courtyard. We are gathered here today to witness justice. To see the law upheld. To ensure that forbidden power, power that threatens the very fabric of our society, is eliminated before it can spread. He turned toward Neria. Neria of the Ashwood Pack. You have been found guilty of harboring fugitives, of using outlawed magic, and of conspiring against the throne. The sentence is death by fire. Do you have any last words? Neria stared at him. At the crowd. At Valen with his nightmare eyes. And something inside her finally, irrevocably snapped. Yes, she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. I have words. She lifted her chin, meeting Theron's gaze directly. You call me cursed. Call me dangerous. Call me an abomination. But the only monsters I see here are the ones wearing council robes. The ones who murdered an innocent woman. Who tried to kill babies. Who sold this kingdom to something that should never have been given power. She turned her gaze to Valen, and the silver flame inside her roared to life. You're not a king, she said. You're a puppet. A vessel for something that wants to watch this world burn. And I'm done being afraid of you. The chains around her wrists began to glow. Not with the binding runes. With silver light. I'm done being ashamed of what I am. The glow spread up her arms, wrapping around her like living flame. I'm done letting you decide my worth. The chains shattered. The sound was like thunder. Like the earth cracking open. Metal exploded outward in a spray of molten fragments, and Neria felt the binding magic collapse like paper in a fire. And the silver flame. It erupted. Light exploded from her body in a wave that sent wolves stumbling backward, shielding their eyes. It poured from her hands, her chest, her very soul, climbing higher and higher until it seemed to touch the sky itself. Neria's feet left the platform. Her body lifted into the air, suspended by pure power, and she felt herself changing. Felt something ancient and terrible and beautiful taking shape. Her bones shifted. Her muscles reformed. Silver fur erupted across her skin. Not the dark fur of a normal wolf, but something that looked like moonlight made solid. She was shifting. But not into the form she'd had before. Not into the broken, incomplete thing she'd been as a child. Into something else entirely. Into her true form. The transformation completed in seconds. And when Neria looked down at herself, she saw paws that glowed with silver fire. A body that was massive, larger than any wolf she'd ever seen. And when she opened her mouth, her voice came out layered with power. I am not your sacrifice. The words echoed across the courtyard, through the fortress, through the very earth itself. I am the silver flame, daughter of the ancient line, guardian of balance. And I have come to set things right. She looked down at Valen, at his black eyes widening with something that might have been fear. And you false king, hollow puppet, shadow in stolen skin, your reign ends today. The ground beneath the platform cracked. Fissures spread outward like spider webs, silver light pouring from them. The wood piled around the stake ignited, not with normal fire, but with flame that burned silver and white and pure. The crowd erupted into chaos. Wolves scattered, running for the exits, their screams filling the air. But Theron stood his ground, his face pale but determined. He raised his hands, power gathering around him. "Council," he roared. "Form the binding circle. Now!" The 11 council members moved as one, taking positions around the platform. Their hands rose, and Neria felt it, their combined power, pressing down on her, trying to force her back into chains. But it was nothing. Nothing compared to the inferno raging inside her. She raised her paw and brought it down. The impact sent a shockwave tearing through the courtyard. The platform exploded into splinters. The binding circle shattered like glass. Council members were thrown backward, their bodies slamming into walls and collapsing in heaps. Only Theron remained standing, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This is impossible," he breathed. "You shouldn't be this powerful. Not without training. Not without." "You tried to kill children," Neria said, her voice cold and absolute. "You murdered an innocent woman. You betrayed your king and sold this kingdom to darkness. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" She stepped toward him, her massive form casting shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse with silver fire. "I am your consequence." Theron stumbled backward, and Valen was suddenly there, moving faster than should have been possible. His hand shot out and darkness erupted from his palm, thick, oily, wrong. It slammed into Neria's chest, and she barely felt it. The silver flame consumed the darkness instantly, burning it away like mist in sunlight. Valen's face twisted into something inhuman, something monstrous. His skin began to ripple, to tear, and beneath it, shadows. Pure shadows, writhing and screaming. "You shouldn't exist," he hissed, his voice layered with something that wasn't human. Wasn't Wolf. "You were supposed to be erased. Forgotten. You're ruining everything." "Good," Neria said. And then she roared. The sound shook the fortress to its foundations. Windows shattered. Walls cracked. And from somewhere deep in the forest beyond the walls, she heard an answering call. A howl. Golden and pure and filled with fury. Draven. He was coming. Neria's lips pulled back from her teeth in what might have been a smile. "Your game is over," she told Valen. "And when the true king returns, there won't be anywhere left for you to hide." She turned away from him, from Theron, from the chaos and destruction. And she ran. Not away. Toward the forest. Toward the howl. Toward Draven and his children and everything worth fighting for. Behind her, she heard Valen's screaming orders. Heard the council scrambling to regroup. But she was already gone. A silver flame burning through the darkness. Impossible to catch. Impossible to stop. Finally, terrifyingly free. The forest welcomed her home. Neria ran through the trees like wind made flesh, her silver form weaving between ancient trunks, her paws barely touching the ground. The world blurred around her, green and gold and shadow, but she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Because behind her, she could feel them coming. The council's hunters. Valen's corrupted wolves. An army of darkness chasing the light she'd become. But ahead, she felt him. Draven's presence was like a beacon in the chaos, steady and fierce, and exactly where he'd promised he would be. Waiting. Fighting. Refusing to give up even when the world told him he should. The trees opened into a clearing, and Neria skidded to a halt. There. Draven stood at the center, his golden wolf form massive and powerful, surrounded by at least 20 of Valen's soldiers. His fur was matted with blood, some his, most theirs. Bodies lay scattered around him, proof of the violence he'd already unleashed. But he was tiring. She could see it in the way his shoulders heaved with each breath. In the slight tremor in his legs. In the way he kept glancing back toward a hollow tree where the babies. They were hidden there, wrapped in cloth, miraculously still asleep despite the carnage around them. Neria's heart clenched. He'd come back for her. Even though she'd told him to run. Even though staying meant certain death. He'd come back because that's who he was. Someone who didn't abandon the people he loved. The soldiers hadn't seen her yet. They were too focused on Draven, circling him like predators around wounded prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Neria didn't give them the chance. She launched herself into the clearing with a roar that shook the earth itself. Silver fire exploded outward as she landed, a wave of pure power that sent soldiers flying. They hit trees, rocks, the ground. Hard enough to break bones, to steal breath, to remind them exactly what they were facing. Draven's head snapped toward her, his golden eyes widening. And in that moment, in the split second where their gazes locked across the battlefield, Neria saw everything she needed to see. Recognition. Relief. Pride. Love. Raw, undeniable, burning love. "Get the children," she commanded, her voice resonating through the clearing. "Get them and run. I'll hold them off." But Draven didn't run. Instead, he moved to stand beside her, his massive form a wall of gold next to her silver, their shoulders touching. His voice, when it came, was layered with alpha authority and absolute certainty. "We stand together. Or not at all." The soldiers who'd managed to get back to their feet hesitated. Their eyes darted between Neria's silver flame and Draven's golden power, and she could see the calculation happening behind their expressions. Two of the most powerful wolves they'd ever seen. Standing side by side, ready to defend each other to the death. It should have been an easy decision. Retreat. Regroup. Live to fight another day. But then Valen stepped into the clearing. The false king moved like a shadow-given form, his body no longer even pretending to be fully wolf. Darkness leaked from his skin like oil, and his eyes, those horrible black pits, fixed on Neria with something that looked like hunger. "You've made this so much more difficult than it needed to be," he said, his voice echoing with layers that didn't belong to any living creature. "If you'd just died quietly, I could have finished what I started. The seals could have been broken. My master could have crossed over. And this world," he smiled, and it was the most grotesque thing Neria had ever seen. "This world could have been remade in his image." "Your master is never crossing over," Neria said, silver flame dancing across her fur. "Because I'm going to burn every shadow you've planted. Every corrupted wolf. Every trace of darkness you've spread. And then I'm going to come for you." Valen laughed. "With what army? The council wants you dead. The packs fear you. You have no allies. No support. Just a broken king and two helpless babies. That's where you're wrong." The voice came from the edge of the clearing. Neria's head turned, and her breath caught. Wolves were emerging from the trees. Dozens of them. Maybe more. But these weren't council soldiers. These weren't Valen's corrupted pawns. These were rogues. Outcasts. Wolves who'd been rejected by their packs, cast out for being different, for questioning authority, for refusing to bow to corruption. Wolves like her. At their head walked Saris, her silver hair gleaming in the dappled sunlight, her pale eyes calm and knowing. "Did you really think she was alone?" Saris asked, addressing Valen with something like pity in her voice. "Did you really think the prophecies spoke of one wolf standing against the darkness?" She gestured to the assembled rogues. "The silver flame doesn't burn alone. It ignites others, gives them courage, shows them that being different isn't a curse, it's a gift. And every wolf here has chosen to stand with her, to fight for a kingdom that's worth saving." More wolves emerged. Elder wolves. Young wolves. Mothers with pups. Warriors with scars. All of them moving to form a line behind Neria and Draven. A wall of defiance. A promise that darkness wouldn't win. Not today. Valen's expression twisted. The shadows around him writhed and hissed, agitated by the presence of so much resistance. "This changes nothing," he snarled. "You're still outnumbered. The council army is hours away. When they arrive." "When they arrive," Draven interrupted, his voice ringing with royal authority, "they'll find their false king burned to ash and the true heir to the throne standing in his place." He took a step forward, and the ground trembled. "I am Draven, son of Magnus, grandson of the first king, rightful ruler of this kingdom. And I am done hiding, done running, Done letting traitors and demons decide the fate of my people. His golden eyes blazed. This ends now. Valen's face contorted with rage. He raised his hands, and darkness exploded from him, thick tendrils of shadow that lashed out like whips, seeking to tear, to destroy, to consume. But Neria was faster. Silver flame erupted from her body, meeting the darkness head-on. The two forces collided in the center of the clearing with a sound like worlds breaking, light and shadow warring for dominance. And in that moment, with fire in her veins and an army at her back and Draven standing beside her like he'd never leave, Neria understood. This was always where she was meant to be. Not hiding, not running, not ashamed of what she was, but standing at the center of the storm, burning bright enough to drive back the darkness, strong enough to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. The battle that followed would be sung about for generations. The Silver Flame and the Golden King standing together against impossible odds. The rogues and outcasts who became heroes. The moment when everything changed. But that story, that full, complete story, wasn't finished yet. Because as the sun climbed higher and the silver flame burned brighter and the darkness finally began to retreat, Neria looked at Draven, at his children sleeping peacefully in their hollow tree, at the wolves who'd chosen to stand with her. And she made a choice. Not to be what they expected. Not to fulfill some predetermined destiny. But to be exactly who she was. Broken and powerful. Afraid and brave. Cursed and blessed. Human. Wolf. And everything in between. The battle raged on. The silver flame burned. And in the distance, more wolves were coming. Some to fight with them. Some to fight against them. But Neria wasn't afraid anymore. Because she'd finally learned the truth that had been buried beneath years of shame and fear and self-hatred. She wasn't a mistake. She wasn't too much. She was exactly enough. And that more than any prophecy, more than any power, more than any title or throne, that was what would save them all. So here's the question that matters. Would you have chosen her side? Would you have stood with the cursed girl nobody wanted? The one they called broken, dangerous, wrong? Or would you have been one of the voices in the crowd, calling for her death, demanding her silence, insisting she was too different to deserve life? Because that's what this story is really about, isn't it? Not wolves and prophecies and ancient magic. But the choice we all face when someone different stands up. When someone powerful refuses to dim their light. When someone broken dares to believe they're worth saving. Do we stand with them? Or do we become the wolves who hunt them down? Neria's story isn't finished. Draven's throne isn't reclaimed. Valen's darkness isn't fully defeated. The council hasn't answered for their crimes. And those two babies, innocent, helpless, utterly dependent on the wolves who saved them. Their future is still being written. But here's what we know for certain. The silver flame has awakened. The prophecy is in motion. And nothing, not the council, not the false king, not centuries of fear and suppression, is going to put that fire out. Because some lights are meant to burn. Some voices are meant to be heard. Some wolves are meant to rise. And Neria? She's done apologizing for being one of them. If this story sets something ablaze in your chest, if Neria's fight became your fight, if you found yourself wanting to stand beside her in that clearing, silver flame and all, then don't walk away. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because here, we don't tell tales that fade. We tell stories that burn. Stories about the outcasts who become heroes. The broken who become whole. The cursed who become blessed. Stories about wolves who refuse to die quietly. Who choose love over fear. Who stand in the fire and don't burn. They become it. And if you're still here, still listening, still feeling, still wondering what happens next, then maybe you're one of them too. Maybe you're the silver flame waiting to ignite. The voice waiting to be heard. The wolf who's been told to stay quiet for far too long. So subscribe. Join the pack. And let's see what kind of fire we can start together. Because Neria's story? It's just beginning. And the best part? So is yours. Welcome to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories, where every tale leaves a scar. And every scar tells the truth. Subscribe now. The flame is waiting.